Hello everybody, welcome
Hello.
to our session. Today we are talking with Leif about WebSocket-based apps, and we are using, of course, Vaadin because we are both working for Vaadin. I'm working on our marketing team. I used to be a real engineer before, but nowadays I'm working with our open source contributions and all kind of community events. But I still have my IDE open most of the time when I'm working at the office, so I'm quite often like working with some example applications still, and then complaining about some missing features to Leif.
Yes. So hey, I'm Leif. I used to be an engineer, then I became a manager, then I said no, screw that, and then I became an architect. So now I architecturize around our product development.
Yeah, and you're still quite involved in like also low-level API design and
full stack, low-level details and high-level details.
yeah. So today we will show you a quick intro to Vaadin, so what Vaadin is and how Vaadin works. Then we will take a bit deeper dive to the communication, that how Vaadin does the client-server communication behind the scenes, and how we also use WebSockets there in some cases. And we will show a lot about that more using an example that we will build here, and that's built using Spring Boot and Project Reactor. So we have the reactive APIs that were introduced in Spring 5, and then the UI is, of course, built with Vaadin. So Vaadin 10 is a tool to build modern web applications, and the main design thing that we have in all that we do in Vaadin is developer productivity. So whenever there is a kind of a difficult decision to whether to, for example, let's say scalability, and then the productivity, we will pick the productivity, at least to the certain matter.
Yeah, and that's really like, we are the opposite of, for instance, Google there, because most people don't have the same problems as Google have. They instead have the problems that their money and time doesn't let them do all the coding they want to do.
Yeah, and also we value great developer experience and also user experience. So we hope that you will save some time using our tools, and this way you can actually concentrate on the UI itself as well. And also our UI components, we have invested quite a lot of time to make those like really usable, and you can use them with mobile devices and desktop devices, and then we also provide some example applications and more like larger composites of our UI components so that you can build your UIs faster. And everything we do is for web. So basically
for Java.
And for Java, yeah. So in the first versions, we actually had a kind of an terminal independent idea that we could also deploy Vaadin applications to, for example, Swing, so that the rendering engine would be based on Swing or AVD or whatever. And finally, today we are mostly about web. So there is nothing. In the latest version, there is almost nothing kind of
There's nothing
related to this terminal adapters or anything. So basically nowadays in our Java components, you can actually see that the web is behind there, but most often you don't need to think about too much about that. But if you need to go to the low-level web development details, then you can still go there. So components, that's the basis of Vaadin platform. We have a lot of different kind of UI components that you can use, and those are now with Vaadin version 10, they are built as web components. So previously we were using Google Web Toolkit to implement these components, but Vaadin 10 was a big release where all of those were built as web components. And nowadays you can actually take any of our components and use it with any framework, or actually you don't need any framework to use it. You can just take a normal HTML page, then import the Vaadin component there and just use the HTML tag to just place your Vaadin component there. But for Java developers, you probably always want to use the Java API, or not always, but you will at least use that as well. So you can instantiate new components using the Java API, configure it, and then there is this new alternative way as well in Vaadin 10, so that you can actually define HTML templates where you have the components, and then you just use Java to hook those components into your business logic. And in Vaadin 10, all these components, you can pick them separately to your project. In Vaadin then you always had basically one jar file where you got all the core components, and then if you wanted to use some like community extensions, then you were just dropping in those components. But now all the core components themselves are also
standalone components.
Yeah.
They can be used anywhere.
Yeah, and you can actually use the new Java framework that we have called Vaadin Flow. You can also use that without any of our components as well. So behind, like, Vaadin Flow is actually not tied to web components that tightly. You can actually go with only core HTML elements as well.
It's tied to HTML elements, and then just div is a really great web component.
Yeah. And basically everything that we do is open source. So we have APAS 2 license, so it's very open source. There is no GPL hooks or anything. And yeah, I think you can actually continue from this.
Yep. So the core concepts, what you as a Java developer would do when you build your UI. Again, it's all about components. So we have for each different kind of component, there's, for instance, a button class or a date picker class. You can create instances of those. They are kind of remote controls controlling what's actually happening in the browser, but your actual component instances, all the code that is run, that you write, runs on the server in your JVM. But these components, these kinds of components are not enough. We also need to put those smaller components into like your bigger and bigger layouts and views and so on, so that you actually have your whole application in that way.
And in a real-life applications, you often actually extend, for example, vertical layout that we had on the previous slide, and then you create kind of a composites of Vaadin components that you can reuse in your own application or in a different applications, or what you can share with the community and get them used by other people as well.
Yeah. But then again, having components in a layout, that's not enough. Those components need to do something. And here, the way you do it is the same way as, for instance, Swing or JavaFX. You just add listeners, preferably as lambdas, to your components, and then everything just happens by magic. We'll look at that later also in a while. But still, having components with listeners in a layout, that's not enough. You need to actually have entry points into your application. So by adding a root annotation to any component, that gets available at that URL in your application, and through that you can then make anything. You can of course also have more complex things. You can have layouts that your different roots are in. Those layouts can have prefixes so that all the roots inside that layout also get that URL prefix. You can read parameters like user ID or whatever from the URL and so on. So it's really a single page application, but still actually using the HTML5 history API to not reload the browser for every change, but instead just change the things that actually have changed. But having an entry point with a layout, with components, with event listeners, that's still not enough. You also want to have your own data in your application. There's really simplified, there's two kinds of data. You have your entire database table, lots of rows that you want to show in some way, let the user manipulate or something. So there, in this example, we just get from the person service, we get a bunch of person beans, set them as items in a grid component, and then the framework automatically takes care of lazy loading those to the browser so that only the like 10 or 15 or 20 lines that are shown at that point are actually sent at that point, even though there's like thousands or even more rows returned from the service. And then as you scroll, it automatically behind the scenes transparently preloads so that the user actually doesn't even notice anything. And also the other aspect of data is to edit an individual item. So here you can just say that, hey, here's some UI components. Here's the binder for my data class, like person. Bind this to these components, and then we automatically get validation based on bean validation annotations. And like if you give a person bean to the binder, then it updates all the field components, and vice versa. If the field components are changed, then it actually runs setters on the bean, and then you can separately save that.
Yeah, binder is really kind of advanced component, you can actually use naming-based binding as we have here, and then you can manually also define that, okay, let's take this field and put that into this property.
Yeah.
And you can also manually define those validators. So if you're not using JSR 303 validators, then you can just define them using programmatic code.
Or if you want to do some more complex things that cannot easily be done with JSR or JSR 303 or whatever. But yeah, we're, as always, just showing the easy cases here, so you wouldn't have to sit here for all night.
Yeah, so how Vaadin actually works.
Yep.
So this is kind of the hello world thing that we have here. So we have just one name field, button, and then we put those into layout, and that gets rendered then in browser. So when user comes to this application that is built with Vaadin, it initially loads just kind of a thin client to the browser side. That's built with some JavaScript, or mostly JavaScript, some CSS, and then there is very basically empty HTML page. And then that synchronizes the state with the server side and renders the initial UI. And when you actually start to interact with the application, after that, the communication between the client and the server, that's very efficient. So we only send the changed values. Like in this case, we send in the markus that we typed into the text field and the fact that we click the button. And at that point, the framework actually executes all the click listeners or whatever listeners that needs to be notified. And inside this click listener, you can kind of be rest assured that Vaadin has already synchronized the name value there. So all the client-server communication in Vaadin, that's completely transparent. And then when we get the response, like the framework sends the response to the client-side engine, it doesn't need to render the whole page. So in this case, we just show simple notification on the center of the screen that says, "Hi, Markus." But by default, we are using XML HTTP request there. So in case you have some data which is coming from a background thread, some kind of a background thread, like let's say in a chat application, it's the other user, or if you have a Wi-Fi thermometer, then that might be sending you some data to your dashboard. Then how do those get actually visible on the screen? And for that, we need WebSocket communication. We could, of course, emulate this with like constantly polling the new updates using XML HTTP requests, but that wouldn't be that efficient, and also it would have more latencies.
Yeah, but it's actually used as a fallback if for some reason the WebSocket isn't supported by proxy or browser or whatever.
Yeah, so WebSockets, we have actually been playing with them for quite a long time. I think it was Vaadin version 6, I think almost 10 years ago, when I built the first prototype using WebSocket, but then it was not a standard. Each and every web server had some kind of a different kind of implementation for that. And it was quite horrible for many, many years. But today, all the major servlet engines, they support the standard latest WebSocket standard, and also the same thing in the browser side. So if you are using Internet Explorer 11 or later, basically you can really trust this technology nowadays. The JavaScript example there in the beginning, in the bottom of the screen, is actually really, really simple in this case. So we are just sending one string message to the server, and then we just push out the data there. So in a real-world application, you probably want to send some kind of a JSON messages or something more complex there than simple string messages. But in Vaadin, starting to use WebSockets is actually really, really easy. So there is actually just one annotation that you need to put to your Vaadin UI class, or in...
Yeah, it's not a UI class in 10, but just put an annotation.
It used to be UI class in Vaadin
back
version.
when you were a real coder.
Yeah. And also, if you just enable the WebSocket communication in your Vaadin application, they actually become a bit better. There is less overhead in the communication. If you look at like for example, in our demo.vaadin.com, where I calculated this 15%, if you look at those requests, what happens there is quite a lot of headers, for example. We are sending cookies there, and the payload that you actually get for Vaadin's client-server communication, it can be really, really low. So in WebSocket, you are basically sending only the real data there back and forth. And also because there is constantly open TCP connection there, when you make a new request, it doesn't need
It doesn't need to do the handshake before it can actually send the stuff.
Yeah, and when you are establishing TCP connection, then you will send a couple of packets back and forth, and that takes time. And with WebSocket, that latency is basically gone. But it's not that easy because servlet specification, for example, it doesn't give you any kind of session support for WebSocket communications.
Well, you can hack around it in most cases, but it's a mess.
Yeah, and you really want us to do that work for you. And also, you cannot use servlet filters because the communication channel is constantly open. So whenever you send new data to the server side, servlet filters cannot intercept those requests.
Yeah, and that's really a problem if you're using, for instance, Spring Security, because that's really based on servlet filters.
Yeah, not totally based on servlet filters, but that's the most common way to use Spring Security. So if you want to use Spring Security with the WebSocket-based Vaadin applications, you will need to do a bit different kind of things. It's perfectly usable, but basically
or any other application using WebSockets.
Yeah. And also there are still some web proxies that are not that compatible with WebSocket communications. I think that's getting kind of away this problem. People need to upgrade those as well because more and more services are using WebSocket communications. So let's build an application with WebSockets.
Finally. We promised this would go in 10 minutes. Do you want to time me or should we just roll with it?
I don't think anybody cares if it's 11 minutes.
Okay, let's aim for 11 minutes then. What we have here is, of course, really simple application because this is a demo. We have a chat message bean, which just like who sent the message and what's the actual message. And that's about all we have here. I'm going to start by actually creating, not a new package, but come on, demo, a new class, yes. Main view might be a good name for it. And we will extend a vertical layout, which is again what explained by usually you create your components by following or extending some existing one, just adding some your own stuff there. We'll do the constructor first, make it really simple just to see that we have something working. We will add a new component. Let's make it an H1 component. So that's just a heading.
Yeah, that's the low-level HTML tag basically.
Yeah,
and Vaadin component around that.
And let's just add some text there. And then the final thing we need to do is to make this also actual so we can navigate to it. We set it now to the default empty root here. And if we open this in a browser, we actually see that heading here. So we're getting somewhere, but not really there yet. For the actual chat, we need 2 more or 3 new parts here. We need somewhere to show the messages from the chat. So that's a new vertical layout. Let's make it, name it messages. Then we need a text field for actually typing in the message. Let's name it just input. And then I think this was being made for your grandmother.
Yeah, he don't know how to use the enter as a shortcut for the message, so we need a button as well.
Yeah, send button. And now we can actually also add these to our UI. Let's add the messages text field just there in that way. But then the input and the button will put those into a horizontal layout so that they get besides each other. New horizontal layout. And there we put input and send as children.
Yeah, so horizontal and vertical layout, those are the most simplest layouts that we have, but you can also fall back to div elements if you want and put them there and then lay out them with CSS in whatever you want if you have those skills. But usually you can do pretty advanced stuff with this Java only components that we have for layouts.
Yep. So now we see here we have the heading, then some empty space here where the messages would appear, and then we have the input field and the send button. So now let's make it actually a chat. So for that we need to add a click listener to the send button. Add click listener, we get a click event. And what we need to do there, first we create a new chat message. It needs from and the actual message from, let's make it, it's from me, of course. Who else would send a message? And that's now the input value, which is automatically synchronized. And then we also, of course, need to show it. Let's first only show it to ourselves. Let's add a helper actually for that, add message, pass the message there. For this to work, we need to move the messages layout out into an instance field so we can access it here. And then we do messages, add new component. We need a component. Let's put a paragraph. So that's a p tag in the browser. It contains some text. It's get the name of who sent the message, and then a separator, and then the actual message.
Now we have a really nice chat application.
Now
you can chat with yourself.
I can chat with myself. Amazing. Yeah. And also let's do a small tweak here so that when we send something, we clear the old value from the input field, set value empty string, and also focus it again so that you can continue typing even if you press that button.
Yeah. So we have a tiny user experience improvement.
Yeah. But the main problem here is still that this is a single user chat application. Who wants to use that? Nobody. No. We also have one more class in our application already. It's a really simple Spring Boot skeleton. And then we have defined two beans here. One is unicast processor. That's some stuff from Project Reactor.
Exactly, that's used for sending those messages, and then we configure that together with the Flux.
Yep.
And then we configure it so that it actually saves a couple of messages, and then the actual client applications can subscribe to this Flux and show those messages.
Yeah, and right now, because we have also built-in integration with Spring and also CDI coming in the next version, so this component that is also the entry point here is also a Spring bean, so we can just add constructor parameters and Spring will inject stuff to us automatically there.
Yeah, so basically Vaadin requires just a servlet container by default, but quite many want to use some kind of integrations to Java EE servers or Spring services. So then you can use these and make them manage beans, those UI classes.
And what we want to do here, instead of directly adding the message only to ourselves, we want to pass it to the message distributor. We can do that with onNext here, send the message there. And then we also need to subscribe to the chat message Flux we have here. So chat messages, subscribe, we give it a consumer, and here we can use add message that we already defined. So now we're actually distributing the chat messages to anyone out there. So let's try this again. Hello. Yes, we can still chat with ourselves. And then I have another browser here. We also see the old message. But now when I say hello here also, we get some kind of internal error.
Yeah, so basically we are entering multi-threaded application, and that's quite difficult.
Yeah, we actually see here we have a stack trace that says something cannot access state in Vaadin session or UI without locking the session. So what we need to do is to do locking to make sure that not two different threads are manipulating the UI state at the same time.
Yeah, in this example, probably things would work if Vaadin core didn't prevent it, but we have built into those kind of...
Yeah, to help you avoid doing the simple cases in a way that will give you problems later on, so we actively detect the situation. But to lock, the conventional way of doing it is that, okay, you acquire the lock, it might take a while, then you do the things you actually want to do, run the business logic, so to say. Then you need to say that, hey, Vaadin, push out all the updates that happened, and then in a final block, so that it always happens, you release the lock. This works, but it's lots of boilerplate. Instead, we define another method instead of just lock and unlock. So it's access synchronously, and then just give a callback that is run when the actual lock has been acquired, and then when returning from that, changes are pushed out and the lock is released. But we can do even better. Access synchronously, waits until the lock has been acquired before it continues. In almost all cases, you don't want that. You just want to get on with whatever you were doing. Like in the chat, you don't want to wait until each user has been notified. You just want to continue updating the actual UI, like making the user who sent the message see that yes, it was sent, but you don't need to wait for them all to get there. So therefore, there's also a non-synchronous access that just, if it can get the lock, it does it immediately. Otherwise, it just puts the job in a queue, and then someone else takes care of actually running the task in the order they have been added there. So with that said, now we can continue actually building the application. Instead of using UI access also, we want to use a high-level thing that we actually, when preparing this, realized that, hey, this would be really useful. It's an add-on right now. It will be in the next version, I sincerely hope.
Yeah, because this is the reason why I wanted Leif to this talk. He needs to do some R&D because of the talk.
Yeah.
So the APIs that we provide, they are not that good for the reactive development models currently, but we are now improving those.
Yeah. The main problem here is that we subscribe to this Flux, but we never ever unsubscribe, and that's quite a memory leak. So instead of doing this, we can use this new API that we invented, that we will introduce. We give it a consumer, which is the thing that actually updates the UI. So that's the same, not add attach listener, but add message. Yes. But then we also need to tell it how to subscribe and unsubscribe. To subscribe here, we do kind of the same thing. We get a consumer that wraps this add message and does all the locking and that kind of stuff. And then we just need to pass that one to the same chat messages subscribe method. So let's do that. Subscribe, there we have that. And this one returns a Spring Reactor disposable, and that one we need to also do something with when actually unregistering. So we can also do this.
So basically when the user leaves the application, closes the window or browser.
So now we have that here. And the last thing we need to do is to bind all this to the life cycle of a component so that we subscribe when the component is put into use, and then when the component is no longer used, either because the user navigates to some other part of the application, or then because he just quits using the entire application, then it needs to unsubscribe. So we bind it to this. And now we might actually have a working chat application, right? So let's say hello again. No, it doesn't work. If you try to send a message here, we see something funny though. Hello? And now suddenly the other message also appeared. The problem here is we're still not using WebSockets, so this browser window only saw what's happening when it sent a message to the server that said that, hey, we clicked the send button, and then the server said that, yeah, thanks for clicking that. And by the way, we also had these changes pending for you. But we want to get those to be sent immediately. And the way we do that is just to add this one little...
This is my favorite part.
Yes.
Enabling WebSocket communication with one line.
So now actually, if I say hello here, then it also appears in the second browser window. And these, okay, both talk to localhost and so on, but these are completely independent of each other.
But hey, you are still chatting with yourself.
I'm still chatting with myself. Yeah, that feels a little bit silly. So let's also add a little bit of UI here. We add a dialog when we open this view, a dialog that asks for the name, and then only when you give any name you actually get so that you can do the chatting. So let's create a dialog with a bunch of components. No, actually only one. We'll put a vertical layout there. And what we want to have inside that is
text field and a button again.
Yes, name field and a join button.
There are some other components in Vaadin as well, but
yeah, these are the most commonly used. So let's create text field. Let's actually put a label in it, name, and then a button that says join, and that's join button. And then we also, of course, want to open the dialog immediately. So with this change, we actually get a dialog there. It still doesn't do anything. We need to add a click listener to the join button. So let's do that. Let's put it here, for instance. Join button, add click listener with a click. And what we do with it is we close the dialog, of course, and then we do name field get a value from it, whatever you type there. We put that into an instance field named name, and then we can change here how we construct the chat message to actually use that value instead. And also, just to be nice to the user, we also focus the input field right away, so you can start chatting immediately. So now I should hopefully have one window where I am chatting, hello, and then we can have another window where Matti is chatting, and he also says...
I need to push the button.
Yeah, you need to actually submit it.
Yeah, you do it.
Come on. Oh yeah. And we also, in the other window, of course, see that, yes, now we actually have two people having an intelligent conversation here.
Yeah. We will show you this example application in the GitHub really soon, or did you do it?
I pushed it already,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you had some time on Mark Reynolds'
Yeah,
show.
he was so boring.
So you can check it out from there, how it works. It's just kind of an example that how you can build applications where you have data coming in and out with WebSockets.
So let's recap what actually happened here. What kind of features did we use, and what's going on here? What we really used was the automated communication all the way through. We didn't define any REST endpoints. We didn't even write any client-side like JavaScript code or anything. Everything just happened from that one Java class that talked with the framework, which then talked with the server for us. We added a root annotation, and it was just there. And then also in our example, we added push annotation, which automatically enabled so that that communication happened over WebSocket instead of using regular XHR requests. And then also we need to remember to use the low-level UI access when actually talking between multiple threads, or then the accessor that will really soon be there. Another thing that we talked about, that we saw that, yes, we built our UI by actually putting Java classes or Java instances inside other Java instances. Many, especially Java developers with like Swing background or something, really like to do it this way. Others prefer to actually build HTML, use lots of CSS and that kind of stuff. You can do whichever you want. The end result will be exactly the same. Other thing that we actually didn't look at here, but it's really cool. All these components are themable using CSS variables, which means that you just tweak a couple of lines of CSS, and without any compiling or anything like you used to do back in the SAS days. Instead, it just automatically, with new browser features, can adapt your visual look. So you just change one color value, and the button gets a new color, and the text field gets a new color, and everything just works in that way. All these components are accessible by default. We have put effort into actually trying them with screen reader and other accessible devices. So when you are building an application for any kind of government or anything, then you are good to go immediately.
This used to be kind of a problem with our previous version, because
it's a problem with anything.
Yeah, but now we have really invested on those a lot when we made these new component sets.
Another thing you get automatically is really strong security. It's not because I'm so good, it's because the architecture is so good. Because when everything happens on the server, there's really little that you can screw up. You don't have any endpoints that accidentally have the wrong access. You don't need to manually check that, yes, does this user now have access to this thing, because you can do all that just in Java. You don't need to validate things separately in the client and in the server, and all those different things can just automatically work for you.
And also you are not exposing your UI code to the
the actual implementation is also hidden away. That
there is smaller kind of attack surface that the hacker can access.
Stable APIs, and actually not only, like, of course, just like Java itself, we need to adapt to new things, and things change now and then, but still we keep the same core things, like a button was a button in the same way back in like version 3.
Yeah, we have actually really long history in this sense. So we have, it used to be a different name at that point. It was called Millstone, but basically the programming model was almost the same. Some APIs have been changing, but then we have just adapted the product, bringing in new features that the web platform nowadays offers us.
Yeah.
But the actual Java API, that has been relatively stable.
Yeah, and there's also another kind of forward stability-ish, but we like enterprise customers. We like to give enterprise support. So actually, 5 years is the standard support that you get like out of the box. And then if you really want to be supported longer, then you can also buy that. Compare that to your random JavaScript framework that probably nobody cares about 1 year from now. And then also, before I hand over to Matti again want to emphasize that all that I did here, all that we have, it runs in the JVM. You have direct access to all your favorite libraries. You can use your favorite like JUnit or whatever. You don't need to do asynchronously if you just talk with a local database. All those kinds of things really help with the productivity.
Yeah. And it's basically the same tool, your favorite Java IDE that you are using to build both the backend and the UI.
Yeah. Oh, one more slide before I hand over to Matti. This, of course, works in all modern browsers and Internet Explorer 11.
And in mobile browsers.
Yes, those are modern.
Yeah, they are usually actually much easier for us to maintain because the rotation of your mobile phone is maximum 2 years, maximum 3 years. Then, on the other hand, if you have old desktop machines in some old companies, then they might be still running in the Internet Explorer 8. Yeah. And actually for that, we still support the Vaadin version 7, and that's for a couple of months for free.
For a couple of months, yeah. So don't get started with that anymore.
Yeah.
But still, just to like prove the point that yes, we are still supporting IE8 compatibility also because lots of enterprises need that.
Yeah. Yeah, and as I also already said in the beginning, you often like extend those Vaadin components and create those compositions, but Vaadin is extendable also in other ways, so you can get, well, especially with the Vaadin 10 release now, you can basically take any web component and really easily add a Java API for that. If you want to use some like traditional JavaScript component, you can wrap those as well rather easily, so that then you have the Java API and then you can use that in your own applications, and you can use it in different applications, and you can package it as a jar file, and you can also share that in a thing called Vaadin directory. So this way, all the Vaadin community can share your UI components that you have created. I think there was for Vaadin 7 and 8 there was almost 800 add-ons already. Nowadays we are listing also some web components because they are so easy to use with Vaadin 10 that you can almost drop it in your application and start using them. But there is a lot of those extensions, and some of those extensions are actually commercial because I'm into mountain biking and I eat a lot, so I need some money for my food. And there is actually, for example, for charting, there are some open source add-ons for Vaadin as well, but this is definitely the one that you want to pay for. And then we have some other extensions for the open core business model, like the visual designer. Then we have a custom Selenium extension that knows a little bit about the client-server communication that we do, and we also have like a custom selector API that you can use to build. Well, you can basically use it to query the button that has OK in it, and you don't need to put any like identifiers for your each and every element that you use in your application.
Also, release-wise, with 10 that we released this spring, we have the same kind of approach that Java also has jumped into, but we were actually first by a couple of weeks. So every quarter we do a new feature release. Most of those are, of course, quite small, no really big changes. But then every now and then, like on average, every 2 years or 1 to 2 years, we do a long-term support release, which we will maintain for 5 years. But those in between are just like a small overlap with the next one. Actually, that's the general principle, but we already have decided that 14 already will be the next long-term support. So we're a little bit quicker than planned here in the beginning. On the roadmap, like what's coming, Vaadin 11, what was out 2 months ago. In 1 month, there's a new quarterly release, Vaadin 12. In that, we will keep improving, especially the Java APIs, because we wanted to get Vaadin 10 out. We didn't have time to do all the things that we would have wanted, so we continued just polishing there. Then we're adding some helpers.
And in a pretty same way as with, let's say, Java version 9 and 10 and 11, like the major release, it doesn't necessarily need that it's a big job for you as an application developer if you are using Vaadin.
Yep.
So Vaadin 10 was a big change, but then from Vaadin 11 there was almost nothing that you need to do, just update the BOM in your BOM XML.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a single breaking change between 10 and 11. But yeah, also planning for Vaadin 12, progressive web app support. So just again, at the same place where you would put the push annotation, you could also put a PWA annotation, and with that you have a progressive web application, so something that you can install on a mobile device immediately without going to an app store or anything like that. Then we're adding more components. Then we're getting CDI and OSGI support to the same level as the Spring support that we had already from the initial version. Then we're also adding a new material theme, so Google's material design inspired theme for all the built-in components, and lots of small fixes and so on, of course.
Yeah, that's pretty handy if you're taking some components from the Google's component set and put them to your Vaadin application.
For instance.
Yeah. And we do some consulting, so we have an army of Vaadin experts who have lots of experience with different kind of applications built with Vaadin. So if you're starting with Vaadin, then it's quite common that you hire one of our experts to join your team for the first couple of weeks. And then we have some different kind of consulting packages that you can take, for example, creating a custom theme for your application. Or then we have a UX team who really they mostly think about how people use the application, and they could give some hints that how you can make the user experience better in your Vaadin applications. So if you want to start with Vaadin development, you can go to vaadin.com. That basically guides to the start page. You have different kind of starter examples there. We have a full stack example. Then we have smaller examples without the backend all, and then we have like a Hello World style examples. And then we also have a starters which are using only the web components. So if you want to go and try out, for example, the Vaadin grid, which is probably the most advanced component that we have, if you want to throw that into your React application, you can go and try Vaadin React Starter. And all our stuff is in GitHub as well. And we, of course, expect you to report all the issues and enhancement ideas there. And for instant messages, we started to use Jitter. And if you want to use like a traditional forum, we have that in vaadin.com as well. But of course, we are also monitoring questions in Stack Overflow if you like to use that instead. And also, it's very handy to come to our booth area. So we have a booth with a big reindeer there. And you can come and see how Vaadin works. And you can actually try it out there at the booth. And you will get this kind of a Vaadin t-shirt as a reward for that. I think that's pretty much all we have for today, but we still have about 5 minutes left. So if there is some questions now, it's very good time to ask those. There you go.
You mentioned that you have mobile support. Are all the components by default responsive?
Yeah, so the question was that do we have a mobile support? Yes, we do. Previously, we actually had a separate add-on that you could throw into Vaadin application. It was called TouchKit, but we actually open sourced, that was a commercial extension. We actually open sourced that for the old Vaadin 8 series. But then now that we have built these new components for Vaadin 10 using web components, they are from the ground up built mobile first. Yeah. So if you can you open the components page? And so, for example, the date field, you can see that all those components, they are designed so that there is like, if you go there with a mobile device, there is enough spacing around the buttons, and many of the user experience things there they are like mostly for the touch devices. So for example, the date picker, you can use it with mouse as well by scrolling, but it's really, really intuitive if you have a touch device there.
Yeah, so actually if I set a small phone screen here, then it actually fills the whole width instead of being almost to the edges, but not fully.
Yeah, but like with any front-end frameworks, you, of course, if you want to support the same application in different devices, you will still need to think about it beforehand in some cases. So in some cases, I think you can, for certain internal business applications, it doesn't make sense maybe to think that if it's usable on a mobile device, it's better just to make the desktop application and maybe build some view that you critically need on the field, implement that so that it works also in the mobile device.
Yeah, but you can still also do a responsive one if you want.
Of course, but that takes more time in basically all the front-end frameworks as well.
Yep. Any other questions?
There you go.
Is it easy to unit test?
Is it easy to unit test?
Like the accessor is like a static field, so if you want to capture that and like send fake events, does it seem that convenient?
The most convenient way of unit testing is usually to do some MVC kind of thing. So you actually separate the view logic from your business logic, and then you can test all your business logic separately. And then the view logic, you probably still want to test that through a browser. You don't want to have maybe full coverage, but instead do that through a browser so that you actually test what the user will see.
Yeah, and of course you can, to certain degrees, you can mock the Vaadin sessions and all the context classes, and then you can use, well, basically unit test the actual component that you have built.
Yeah, but still, well, yeah.
Yeah, if you, for example, take in Spring.io, we have one Vaadin guide there, and there is actually a simple unit test for the UI code as well.
Any more questions? Doesn't seem like that. Scream if you still hold up your hand, but we're missing you.
Okay. Thank you then. Join our booth, visit our booth. We will be here tomorrow as well. So if you visit our booth today and get the t-shirt, you might actually win an iPad as well tomorrow.